Ryan Wilson's latest mock draft is out, and Alabama quarterback Bryce Young is headed to the Texans with the first overall pick. Two of the top three players are quarterbacks, C.J. Stroud going to Carolina. Also in the top five, Georgia defensive lineman Jalen Carter. Ryan has him projected to go to the Seahawks, courtesy of the Russell Wilson trade. And another member of that defense, quarterback Kelee Ringo, comes in at number 8 to the Jaguars. And we want to talk about those players and a few others to keep an eye on as we head into conference championship weekend in college football. And to help us do that, CBS Sports senior draft analyst Ryan Wilson is here, looking very festive today, Ryan, I must say.
Happy holidays, Jeremy. What we got going on here?
All right, let's start with Jalen Carter. After playing 8 games as a backup in 2021, as you point out in your mock, he's been arguably Georgia's best player on defense. How much can his stock jump with another standout showing in the SEC title game this weekend?
Well, Jeremy, he's so good already. I don't know if there's a pick higher than 1 or 2, and he's already in that conversation. And you mentioned last year's Georgia team. They had 5 defensive players go in round 1, and there's a chance that Jalen Carter is better than all 5 of those players by the time it's all said and done, and those are some really good football players. But he does things that very few people at that size can do. You see it here against Tennessee. He struggled with an ankle injury earlier this year, and I think he had a knee that kept him out for a few games. But when he's 100%, sweet Jesus alive, he is unstoppable. So then the question becomes, to your point, can he go first overall? I think the conversation will be in terms of non-quarterbacks between him and Will Anderson, the edge rusher out of Alabama. And then, of course, where do those quarterbacks go at 1 or 2 or 3 if teams are trading up to look for that quarterback? But in terms of the best non-quarterback in this draft, it's going to be neck and neck between Jalen Carter, who plays inside at defensive lineman, and Will Anderson, the edge rusher out of Alabama. So he could get 5 sacks in this game, and he'd still be as high as he was, or he could play 5 snaps, and no one would think any differently. That's how good he's been.
Now, you have him at 5, but I've already seen some Bears bloggers already scouting him out, possibly going at number 2 to the Bears. Okay, so who are some of the other prospects that you're keeping an eye on in that game between Georgia and LSU?
So if we want to talk about matchups on both sides of the ball, we'll start with Broderick Jones, the left tackle for Georgia, and he'll probably see a lot of B.J. Ojulari, the edge rusher for LSU. B.J.'s older brother, Aziz, was a second-round pick of the Giants a few years ago, and he is a high-motor, explosive player, never takes a play off, and he's going to give Broderick Jones all he can handle. Both these guys are going to end up being top 40-ish picks and perhaps even sneak into the first round. And if you want to talk about first-round matchup, you mentioned Kelee Ringo earlier, the 6'1", 200-plus pound cornerback who plays every bit of that. Fast, great ball skills, physical. He'll go up against Kayshon Boutte at times. Ringo is a first-round pick all day long. We'll see where Boutte slots in as we get through the pre-draft process. But an explosive player, a really good wide receiver, and one of the top 5 wide receivers in this draft class.
Ryan, let's go to the Pac-12. The title game between Utah and USC is being played Friday night. Trojans 2.5-point favorites. Only one player in your latest mock draft playing in that game. That's wide receiver Jordan Addison, who you have going at 15 to the Falcons. What do you like about Addison's game that you've seen this year?
Yeah, Jeremy, I feel a little bit like Clark Griswold. Christmas lights here shorted out the connection, but we're back. We're ready to go. Jordan Addison is as electric as these Christmas lights, and you mentioned him as the only first-rounder on that USC team. Pitt transfer, and I know people on the Pitt staff who just raved about how important he was to Kenny Pickett's success, and we're seeing Pickett finally start to play well in Pittsburgh. But here's the thing when we talk about Jordan Addison. He's going to be under 6 feet, and he's going to be about 180. He plays much bigger and stronger and faster than that. But when you look historically at players who have gone in the first round at that size, you have names like Kevon Austin, John Ross, Ted Ginn, Jahan Dotson, Brandon Cooks. So there's a mixed bag there in terms of playmakers. I think that Addison has a chance to be truly special. He is playing along Caleb Williams. They both help elevate each other's game, and I think there's a real chance that he could end up being wide receiver 2. I have him just behind Quentin Johnston, and maybe even wide receiver 1, depending on the team that drafts him and how they feel like he will fit in their system in the NFL.
And we mentioned Addison, maybe the only player in the mock in that game, but one player we're going to all have our eyes on is the guy that's thrown to him, Caleb Williams, the runaway Heisman favorite. What's your evaluation of Williams as he finishes his sophomore season, likely heading to the college football playoff?
Yeah, he's a special player, Jeremy. And the funny thing is, when you're evaluating players, you're typically concerned about those who are eligible. And Caleb Williams is still a year away from that. But you can't not see him based on the way he has played this year, whether you're just watching casually on a Saturday night or whether you're looking at someone like Jordan Addison trying to see how good his game is going to translate to the next level. But as we sit here, we're talking about 3 players in terms of quarterbacks for next year. Caleb Williams, Quinn Ewers out of Texas, and, of course, Drake May out of UNC. A year ago, we were saying things like, well, this quarterback class that we're currently in is going to be better than last year's version where Kenny Pickett was the only first-round pick. And things changed, and now this quarterback class is a little murkier for sure. But it's hard to imagine a situation where those three names I mentioned and Caleb potentially being at the top of the list isn't going to be reason for us to have conversations a year now about why teams in the NFL are positioning themselves to get one of these quarterbacks, because they appear to be truly special. They'll get under the microscope in the weeks and months to come for sure. But right now, Caleb Williams, it appears he did the right thing by leaving Oklahoma and joining Lincoln Riley in Southern California.
Lots of comparisons to Patrick Mahomes, and he's justifying it with his play. Over in the ACC title game number 9, Clemson is seeking a 7th title in 8 seasons as they take on 23 North Carolina. Who are the top prospects to watch in that game for you?
Well, there's no Trevor Lawrence in Clemson, and we've seen DJ Uiagalelei struggle at times. But on defense, they have some dudes, and they have some dudes that are going to be in the first-round conversation for sure. Brian Brzee, the defensive tackle, is a name to keep an eye on. He's 6'5", 300 pounds. He doesn't flash consistently. Now, part of that's he's coming off an ACL. He also had some off-field concerns when his sister passed away unexpectedly, and that obviously took a toll on him, and understandably so. But the height, the weight, all those things that you quote-unquote can't coach, that's why NFL teams are intrigued by Brian Brzee, and he's going to get better certainly as he gets into that NFL career. And he reminds me in some ways of Drake Jackson, the USC edge rusher from a year ago, who looks like a grown man, didn't flash consistently at USC, but when you talk to scouts, they said teams love the size, and they're going to draft it, and we've seen him have that success early on in his career. And Myles Murphy, I'll mention quickly, he's only 20 years old. He is a problem on the edge, and he is going to get bigger, stronger, faster, and better, once he hits 21, 22, 23. So expect him as a good player now to get even better year 2, year 3 of his NFL career, and he could end up being a top 15 pick, maybe even a top 10 pick, Jeremy.
After their dominant win over Ohio State last week, Michigan head to the Big Ten title game as 16.5-point favorites against Purdue, who hope to be spoiler makers in this game, to borrow from Chip Patterson. Nobody from this game is in your first-round mock, but who are you going to be keeping an eye on there?
Yeah, so a ton of names here. Mazi Smith is incredibly athletic, and he was on Bruce Feldman's freak list coming into the season, and he moves like he's about 180 pounds, not someone who's closer to 300. Charlie Jones out of Purdue I'll mention because here's a kid that transferred from Buffalo to Iowa, now to Purdue. I'm sure Hassel still wishes he was at Iowa given the way he's changed that offense. He is an absolute playmaker. Now, he's not going to outrun anyone consistently. He's not going to create a lot of separation. He catches everything thrown his way, and he has transformed that offense. Aiden O'Connell's another great story, helped that team to win last week. He just lost his brother. That's another off-field story, and he was incredibly emotional, and understandably so. But he's a guy who's worked himself into the conversation as a late day 3 prospect because of his ability to run this offense. Now, he's not going to be confused with Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson, or have the arm strength of Josh Allen, but he does everything well, and I think that's what NFL teams are looking for when they're trying to draft these backup quarterbacks.
The Big 12 Championship is one of the more intriguing conference title game matchups this week. Number 3 TCU, slight favorites over 10 Kansas State. And you have Horned Frogs wide receiver Quentin Johnston heading to the Packers in your latest mock. Aaron finally gets a young dynamic wideout, Ryan.
If Aaron's still there. I mean, they waited so long that Aaron might just wipe his hands of the situation and go retire. But Quentin Johnston is an absolute freak. He's 6'5" and 200-plus pounds, and he plays like he's about 190. He's incredibly shifty at the line of scrimmage. He gets in and out of his breaks like he's a much smaller player, and then once he catches the ball, he is going to outrun you to the end zone every single time. There are very few holes in his game, and for some indication of how this is going when we talk about it on the podcast of Rick Spielman, the Draft Podcast, I compared him to a more consistent Chase Claypool, and Spielman straight out called me out, is that was a terrible comp. He's much better than Chase Claypool. So if you like Chase Claypool, Quentin Johnston's much, much better than that. If you don't like Chase Claypool, take solace in knowing that Quentin Johnston is much, much better than that. So fun player. We'll see if he's there when the Packers are on the clock. And, look, Jeremy, I say it all the time. The Packers haven't drafted a wide receiver in the first round in 20 years, so it doesn't necessarily mean it'll change, but they should probably seriously think about it.
CBS Sports senior NFL draft analyst Ryan Wilson discussing his latest mock draft, which is over on CBSSports.com. Thanks for everything, Ryan. Good to see you. And, of course, Ryan, we mentioned, has a new podcast out with former general manager Rick Spielman, talking about mock drafts, position rankings, player stock watch with the first pick. You can download and follow wherever you get your podcast on.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.